What's up, TCC students? Hey, my name is Michael, and this is...
I'm Laura, and I want to tell you about Wednesday nights. We are meeting back here on campus for small groups. Junior high is from 6:30 to 7:30, and high school 7:30 to 8:30. We hope you'll join us. We'll see you there.
Yes, it's going to be really exciting. I have a question of the day for you guys, and that question is this. What is your favorite animated movie? It's a toss-up for me. I would have to say, I think Toy Story. The first one. First one. Has to be the first one is the best one.
That's a good one. Yeah.
So, put it down in the comments. What's your favorite? What's up, TCC students? Hey, I'm so happy that you decided to join us today for week 2 of our series, Doubt It. I'm so excited to be bringing it this week for you guys. I don't know about you guys, but I really like animated movies. I'm all about it. And one of my favorites in the most recent history that I've seen is Zootopia. Have you guys seen Zootopia? I love it. I love the actors that are all in it. It's one of my favorite animated movies. But there's this character in it, and her name is Judy Hopps. And she is a rabbit. And she's actually the first rabbit to ever join the police force of Zootopia. And it's not an easy job, but Judy is committed to solving a mysterious case where formerly intelligent animals seem to be turning what they call savage. They pretty much are just going crazy out of nowhere. And so here's what I want to do. I'm going to show you a clip right now, and I want you to watch and see what happens when Judy makes a big break in her case.
Well, this should be good.
I thought this was just a missing mammal case, but it's way bigger. Mr. Otterton did not just disappear. I believe he and Miss Jaguar, they went savage, sir.
Savage? This isn't the Stone Age, Hops. Animals don't go savage.
I thought so too. Till I saw this. What? He was right here!
The savage jaguar?
Sir, I know what I saw. He almost killed us.
Or maybe any aggressive predator looks savage to you rabbits. Let's go!
Wait, sir. I'm not the only one who saw him. Nick.
You think I'm gonna believe a fox?
Well, he was a key witness, and I enlisted...
2 days to find the otter. Or you quit. That was the deal. Badge.
But, sir, we...
Badge!
Okay, so Judy discovered an important clue in this case, but she's struggling to convince her boss about what she's just found because her evidence has gone missing. And if you've seen the movie, you know you're meant to side with Judy because you've seen the same thing that she's seen. You know the evidence that she's had, but when she goes to show her boss, it's gone. And we see in this moment that evidence is super, super important. Evidence is so, so important. And I don't know about you, but if you're ever trying to convince your friend that you did something really cool, but you don't have any evidence, it could be kind of a hard thing to do. Like, oh yeah, I jumped off the second story balcony and did a front flip. They'd be like, show me the video. And you're like, I don't have one. They wouldn't believe you. You need the evidence. Or maybe when it comes to our faith, we're having a hard time believing in God because we don't have that evidence. We don't have that hard evidence, or we feel like we don't. And I want to kind of break that down and get into that today. Why does this matter? Why are we talking about this? Why does this matter to God? And why does this matter to us? Well, here's what I want to start off with. Faith isn't blind. Faith isn't blind. In nearly every area of our lives, investigating, fact-checking, and the making sure that the others' claims are correct is something that is celebrated in our culture. But when it comes to our faith, fact-checking and investigating, getting into that is almost looked down upon. It's almost shameful to do it. Some people talk about faith in God as if faith means blind trust, but I disagree. Having faith in God doesn't mean that we can't also have evidence and something that supports what we believe. And so today we're going to continue our conversation with doubts and questions, and we're going to kind of get into that today. But last week we talked about how you are not alone in your questions. You are not alone in your questions. And I love how Samaria talked about that. And this week I'm so excited because we get to talk about more of our questions and how God responds when we ask for evidence before we choose to believe, or how people ask for evidence before they choose to believe. And one of the passages I want to focus on is Judges 6. And I encourage you to read it. We're not going to read it today. I'm just going to give you a breakdown of what it is because it's too long to get into a message right now. But I encourage you to read it because it's such a great passage. But I want to give you a little context. So in this passage, there's a man named Gideon. And at the time of this story that we're getting into, Gideon's people, the Israelites, were suffering under the oppression of a nation called Midian. They were frustrated, they were afraid, they were desperate, and God's people cried out for help. And in response, God sent an angel to Gideon to say that he was still with them. But that wasn't good enough for Gideon. He still had a few questions. And in this story, these questions, he asks God for proof of his existence pretty much, and him being there not once, but 5 times before he would be convinced. 5 times before he'd be convinced. And maybe you're hearing the story and it might be shocking or confusing to you because growing up, if you were a Christian, you maybe heard that if you had faith, you wouldn't need to ask God for any proof. Or maybe you heard something that like asking God for answers or evidence means that you're just lacking faith. Or maybe you heard something that like along the lines of that it's wrong to ask God questions. And if that's what you've been told, you might see Gideon's behavior here as something that's embarrassing, something that's shameful. But if you were here last week, that you learn that it's very natural to ask questions. It's a very natural thing to ask questions. And when our questions are directed to God, like in Gideon's case, God doesn't get angry, right? In fact, he seems like to be a pretty understanding God. When we bring him our questions, he seems to be pretty understanding. And I kind of want to move on from Gideon now and take a look at another guy in the Bible. And this is going to take place in John 20, 24 through 29. We'll get into that passage in a little bit. But we're going to be focusing on a guy who is a perfect example of not having enough faith or doubting God. So much so that he even earned the nickname Doubting Thomas. So I want to get into it right now and kind of break down this story. John 20, 24 through 29. It says this. Now Thomas, one of the 12, he's talking about the disciples, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands, and unless I put my fingers where the nails were, and I put my hands into his side, I will not believe." And a week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was there with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them, and he said, "Peace be with you." Then he turned to Thomas and said, "Put your finger here. See my hands? Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." Thomas said to him, "My Lord, my God." And then Jesus said to him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." Man, I love that. So here's what's happening. Jesus has just been crucified, right? He's had his 12 disciples and with him, and they were just devastated by this. So I want you to imagine this. These people thought Jesus had come to just save their lives and save them, but then he ends up dying. I'm sure these followers were mourning because they spent so much time with this guy. I'm sure they were afraid and probably a little ashamed to think that most of them had dropped everything and just decided to follow him. And maybe they were worried about being wrong about everything and doing so. But then just days after his death, stories start to spread around the people that they've seen Jesus. They've seen him just walking around. And people were pretty excited in this time. Then Jesus shows up to all of his disciples except one of them, which was Thomas. So when the disciples tell Thomas that Jesus is back from the dead, he's a little skeptical. And I'm sure I would kind of side with Thomas in this moment too. But I'd be like, guys, I know it's a bummer. Like, it's really sad. Jesus is dead. But like, you didn't see him. He died. And last time I checked, dead people usually stay dead. It was so unbelievable that Thomas said, I'm not going to believe until I can touch the wounds that happened when Jesus was crucified, till I can put my hand in his flesh. And it's a little gross, but okay. So we look at what happens. Jesus shows up to where all the disciples are, and Thomas is there. And did Jesus get angry at Thomas for not having more faith? No. Did Jesus punish Thomas for not believing immediately? No. Did Jesus shame him in front of all the disciples and for having doubts? No. Did Jesus do what Thomas asked? Yeah. His scars, he showed his scars and let Thomas touch them. And that's when Thomas decided to believe. You see, he needed the evidence in order to take that step. He needed the evidence. And God knew that we would also need the evidence. We would need the evidence. And I'm sure Thomas wasn't the only disciple who needed evidence to believe in Jesus, but he's the only one that we know of who was outspoken about it. And so the book of John, where we kind of read the story of Thomas, was written about 50 years after Jesus ascended to heaven. So it was written for a community of Jesus followers who never got the chance to see Jesus in the flesh. And even those early believers needed some reassurance that Jesus really did rise again. I mean, it's kind of a crazy story, right? It must have been so comforting to see someone like Thomas who had all these kinds of questions that they might be asking themselves 50 years later. And Jesus' words to Thomas must have resonated with them so deeply as well. You see, Jesus told Thomas that he got to see Jesus in the flesh, but there would be a future follower of Jesus who would not get the privilege to do so. Jesus said these future believers would have to believe based on just other kinds of evidence, and they would be blessed for that. The story of Thomas demanding evidence isn't a shameful story. It's an essential story. It isn't a shameful story. It's an essential story. And through Thomas's interactions with Jesus, we see that Jesus knew his future followers would need proof. He knew that the people 50 years after that didn't get to experience him would need that proof. He knew people in today's world would need proof. You see, the stories of Gideon and Thomas are just two stories in scriptures where followers of God are asking for evidence from God. And they don't want to believe until they get some hard evidence. And although it may be surprising, in both of the stories, here's what we can learn. That God doesn't shame us for our questions. Some of you today might have questions. Some of you today might be a little confused and not know what to believe. God doesn't shame you for those. God invites those. He wants us to ask questions. And God gives us the evidence in order for us to take that step and believe. So now what? What does God want us to do with all of this? Well, I think it's important to make one thing clear, that some of us are going to be more skeptical than others. That's just how we're built. Because if you've ever taken a personality test, you'll know that we all function a little bit different. And these tests tell us about all the different ways that we react to different situations and how unique that we are. You see, some of us are introverted, some of us are extroverted, some of us like to take charge, and some of us like to follow. Some of us like to be relaxed and laid back, and some of us are more easily excited. Some of us are driven by our feelings, our intuition, and others are driven more by our thoughts, logic, and reason. And none of these traits are better or worse than each other. They're just different ways of being human. But I think it's important for us to realize these different ways that we've been wired, because our personalities can impact the way that we experience God. So if you're more feelings-oriented, you're more likely to experience God through emotions. But if you're more logic-oriented, you're more likely to experience God through logic and reason and thoughts. And if I had to guess, looking at these stories, I'd say Gideon and Thomas were pretty logical people. They needed the hard evidence in order to believe God. And God was okay with that. He wasn't shaming them for that. Being skeptical isn't a character flaw, or it isn't a lack of faith. When Gideon and Thomas struggled to believe, they humbly came to God and asked him for evidence, and God provided it. So what about us, right? What if we still need evidence to believe today? What kind of evidence does God provide for us in today's world? Maybe some of you were just waiting to take that faith with God, leap of faith with God. Maybe you're like, I can't fully grasp onto the idea of God because there's just not enough evidence. Where does that leave us? I believe that we need to be seeking our own answers out. I believe that we need to be taking that step of faith and challenging ourselves and asking ourselves the hard questions and bringing those questions to God. We need to be seeking those answers out because I believe we have so many resources available to us now. I mean, we have the internet, which in and of itself is a great resource. It can be a huge resource. But I think the most important resource that we have around us is people. And for you specifically, it could be a small group leader. And I would encourage you, if you have questions or anything like that, to lean into your small group leader because they might have the answer to those questions, or they might be willing to take that walk with you and find those answers to your questions. Lean into your small group leaders and keep seeking out answers to your questions because it's so, so important. And as I begin to wrap up here, I just want to remind you that when we struggle to believe because we're not sure that we have enough evidence, God's not going to shame us for our questions. Instead of punishing us or silencing us or getting angry with us, God gives us the evidence in order to believe. You just have to lean into it. You have to seek those out. You have to put some work in order to find those answers. But I encourage you to do so. And as I wrap up here, I want to close this with a prayer. But I encourage you, maybe take some time today just to have a conversation with God. If you're doubting, if you're in a spot where you're like, I don't know if I could fully commit to this, I just need a little bit of evidence, take that to God. Ask him for some evidence, ask him for some guidance, ask him for some wisdom so you can seek that out. Will you pray with me? God, we just come to you right now, first of all, thankful for who you are, for your kindness, for your gentleness, for your patience, God. We thank you for creating us with spirits of curiosity, God. And we thank you for not asking us to believe blindly, but giving us evidence we need to know so we can better know you, God. God, I ask that you would help us to continue to learn more about you and the evidence that you've given us so we could deeper dive into who you are and build a better connection with you, God. God, we love you. In your name we pray. Amen. We love you guys, and we'll see you guys next week.